Greetings all, this is Motors and Martinis, and I'm Brian Davis.
And I'm Cary Hubbard.
So today on Motors and Martinis, we're going to talk about two-stroke powered economy and microcars of the post-war era. And I mooted that subject as a topic of conversation the last time we recorded, simply because, Cary, I know they are near and dear to your heart, and there's something I'd like to know a bit more about. But, before we get into that, what's going on over in beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico today?
Well, besides the fact that I'm literally baking to death because it's insanely hot outside, I'm actually making some really great progress with a couple of my projects. One mostly is, as it keeps seeming like we circle back around to it, is the S10. Yay. I got a transmission for it. It's together. It runs and drives. And then I decided I want to fix the air conditioning because it has air conditioning and it's hot as sin out here. So...
Just because you've got a compressor, an evaporator, and a condenser does not mean you have air conditioning. You have the components,
for such. Well, the low-pressure hose going to the evaporator was actually broken into two pieces. So took it all apart, went and got a new one made, put it on, and another hose started leaking. So I took that one off, got a new one made. Third hose started leaking, took that one off. Got it made. It holds and it blows cold. Now the problem I'm dealing with is the old plasticky rubber metal corrugated lines that go under the dash for the air distribution. To say the least, the inside of the dash gets nice and cold now, but nowhere else. So I got to replace all those hoses, which I'm doing right now. And on top of all that, I decided I'm going to put in a rare S10 rally cluster with a tack on it and rewire everything. And I just did that now. So yeah, that's been my entertaining project for the past many days.
Well, you're not the only one who's broiling in the heat. Right now, my partner and I are up at our little camp in Maine once again. And to those listening, I must apologize for the average audio quality on my end. I'm doing the best I can with my... headset mic. My decent mic is still boxed up as part of a move, but please bear with me if you'd be so kind. And it's balmy up here too. It's been in the 90s and a little on the humid side. And even though this is Motors and Martinis, I'm about to crack a nice IPA to aid just to keep my throat from getting too dry.
Well, usually we record in a bit later time, but with things going on, we recorded a little earlier. So I'm actually not even having a drink at the moment. I'm hydrating with some Gatorade because, it's so warm.
Well, I mean, I suppose that's forgivable since you probably don't want to pass out on your way to the car this afternoon.
I don't think that would be such a great idea. But, yeah. Anyways, what's been going on with you besides the sad news that I saw? I'm so sorry to hear about that. But what else has been going about in your life?
Well, I mean, that's been forefront of my thought. It was unexpected. My poor dog MacDougal was the victim of a car accident yesterday, and it was a hit and run, as a matter of fact. And so my partner and I had to lay him to rest, and that was very unfortunate. But we're bearing up. On the more positive side, it's always pleasant to be up here in Maine, and as I've mentioned in the introductory episode, a good friend of mine curates a car collection up here. It's the Bear Collection, and they've got fine examples of Packard, Duesenberg, and other such cars, and they were open for their annual Founders Day event, which is a once a year occasion when they actually open to the public. So I got to go experience that collection and spend some time with them. They even had a fellow there with an old, turn of the century manual fire pump where it's kind of a, seesaw, teeter-totter action where you have guys on either side, and that's how you built up water pressure to try to put out a fire. And let me tell you, if I had to do that back in the day, your house would be burned to the ground because it's a lot of work.
Oh yeah, I'd just say let it burn. Whatever, let it burn. It's I don't know, that might be better than the old what is it, the fire pumps that used fires in it that were drawn behind horses and then changed to those the Christie trucks. But they said that those things would start more fires than they would actually put out as they were going to the scene.
That was certainly a possibility, and you got to figure there was everything was made of wood, and well, I guess that's not true. It was made of wood until it burned down. Then they usually rebuilt in brick. But people still had kerosene lanterns were the primary source of light, and you had a kitchen fire and in your cook stove. I mean, the whole place is ready to go up in flames. But my partner, we're looking at it was a little like a diary his grandmother had left, and she was born turn of the last century, and she was talking about her Christmases as a child, and she talks about having candles on the Christmas tree, but they only lit them on Christmas Eve and only when everyone was there to make sure the house didn't burn to the ground. So one of the interesting cars at the Bayer collection, in and amongst all the Packards and Duesenbergs, was a DKW station wagon combi, I guess. And so
Ooh, what year?
I am not entirely sure. It's
Bubbly kind of era.
yeah, more bubbly, but of course being a combi, it's squared off to the back end. I would be able to look it up. I'm sure I could get that information.
It's probably like a mid to late 50s. 3=6 was kind of that era.
I'm sure that's what it is, and that's kind of a great segue into the functionality of a two-stroke engine, because 3=6. You've got like with an auto cycle, you have suck, squish, bang, blow. Your intake stroke, which draws the mixture in, a compression stroke, a power stroke, and an exhaust stroke. Well, with a two-stroke, they just dispensed with all that. If you'd care to elaborate, since you've actually had some of them.
I've had 2 or 3 or so, and really the entire idea on two strokes, especially in the automobiles, is simplicity. Because like in a Subaru 360, which I've had a couple of, which uses a two-cylinder, two-stroke, 356cc, which was of its class, but we can get into that a little bit more later because that's a whole different thing. With two strokes, you have no valves, you have no camshaft, you have none of those moving parts. The piston is essentially your valve, and it uses the positive and negative displacement of the crankcase. So when the piston goes down, it creates a positive pressure, which then pushes the air through the cylinder out to the exhaust. And then when it does that, it also sucks in the air-fuel mixture, and then it goes up, compresses, fires, goes down, does the whole thing over again. Not very efficient, not very clean whatsoever, but extraordinarily simplistic. And especially if you're in a country, which I'll say, I'll set the tone for the rest of the episode. Consider yourself in a very torn apart country, post-war, don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of manufacturing abilities, but you want to get the people on the road. So what do we produce?
A car with as few moving parts as possible.
And for as cheap as possible as you can.
Exactly. But the 3=6 is down to the fact that instead of one power stroke for every 4, it's 2. So the three-cylinder was thought to behave the three-cylinder two-stroke in that regard behaved somewhat like a 6-cylinder 4-stroke.
Exactly. Yeah, if you consider cycles for 2-stroke to 4-stroke, absolutely, yeah. And incredibly, for the size of a 2-stroke engine, the kind of power you can get out of it, you don't get any torque whatsoever. That's just a complete waste of time. But power-wise, it's actually pretty incredible the kind of power you can get out of a relatively small engine that you just rev them to the moon and go about and smoke your way. It's fantastic.
Well, they use two-stroke technology for little RC airplanes, and I forget, I want to say it was The Secret Life of Machine. It was one of those, I'm pretty sure, British excellent technical programs, and the fellow had one of those tiny little model airplane gasoline two-strokes at the end of his stick. And he sat in an office chair with that engine buzzing its heart out, and that little model airplane engine had enough power to spin a full-size man in an office chair. It was using the leverage of the stick to which it was mounted, but it was really impressive, the amount of power that it generated for its size.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely very interesting, and for the longest time, with two strokes, all the best race winners on the motorcycle circuit were two strokes. I mean, some of the most crazy, deadly motorcycles you could buy in the 70s were big displacement two strokes. And I rode one once, and it was the only time my father, he's never really given me much input on my cars or motorcycles, but I called him once and told him that I was looking at getting, I'm blanking on the name of the bike, but it was a very big displacement, single-cylinder two-stroke, and they were referred to as the Widowmakers.
I know what you're talking about.
And I rode it once, and it was literally like an on-off switch. It was just, and then, wow, white, and it would pop wheelies all the time. And I called my dad, and I was like, oh, yeah, I test rode one of these. And he's like, no, you're not buying that. You're going to kill yourself. That is absolutely a no. I was like, oh. Okay.
Oh, come on. Motorcycle chassis respond really well to a sudden burst of power mid-corner. That's not going to cause you to die at all.
Oh no, not at all. I mean, I've done many dumb things on motorbikes before, but that thing it actually scared the hell out of me. I rode it and I got off it and I was like, that's kind of fun, but yeah, I can see where people are coming from with that one.
What was that? I'm getting off topic, but there was at least one, maybe two bikes with an inline six.
There's two that I can absolutely 100% think of off the top of my head that had from the factory inline six. One was the Honda CBX, which was a 1000cc six-cylinder, which Jay Leno is quite a fan of that one. He actually bought one new. They are beautifully smooth. I mean, they are absolutely incredible. You fire it up, you don't even notice it, and quite powerful. And then there was the Italian motorcycle that used 750cc Benelli, the Benelli Cease, SEI, and I think it was a 750cc six-cylinder, very small displacement six that were very smooth as well.
That sounds like small displacement sixes could be a topic for another show. But back to the two strokes, because sometimes that is all it takes.
So, quite amazingly, actually, over a fairly long time frame, in I would say mainstay, and we could even split this up into West and East European, because the West, that is an entirely different topic when it comes to two strokes. But the West didn't do it as long as the East, but there was quite a fascinating long run of two-stroke cars and many different manufacturers. And what's really interesting is, surprisingly enough, they didn't use a two-stroke in the Isetta. That was actually a four-stroke motorcycle engine, which compared to pretty much all the other micro cars of the Europeans of the 50s, it's kind of surprising they went that route. But
and going back further, I did a little cursory research prior to today's program, and instead of seeing the USA Today in your Chevrolet, you might have been seeing it in your Elmore, because there was a two-stroke American car called the Elmore, and they built a few, and there's a couple examples still in existence, but they were acquired by Billy Durant when he was conglomerating General Motors, and it just got absorbed, and nothing more came of it. But yeah, so there was an American two-stroke car back in the tens and teens.
Okay. Yeah, it was when you had mentioned that earlier when we were talking over text messaging, I had never really heard of that, and I'm not super up on my, I'd say teens, 20s, early 30s American automobiles. I know a couple of very obscure ones, but yeah, I did not know that, so that's really cool to know.
Yeah, and I can see why it probably did. That technology probably didn't proliferate in America, which was a fairly prosperous country that needed, a rugged car, especially in those days when roads were so poor. It made more sense to have a torquey, luggy, beefy four-cycle engine.
Oh yeah. I mean, we can even look at that time frame, and even the European time frame. Small country, small roads. Not really traveling very much. And even before the big road network in America was developed, we always, and we still, that mindset of bigger, better. So, I could see where trying to go that route would probably, and as it did, not work so well for the American market, when they wanted bigger stuff, which, probably when they made the Elmores in the era of, the big displacement four-cylinder cars that we had in America, which were, oh my God.
Well, even a Model T was like, what, a 2.5 liter four? 3 liter four, something?
It was a very... Let's see. I'm actually curious because I do want a Model T, but I know the displacement on the T engines were pretty darn big. Now, granted, they had no compression, but...
The Elmore, though, actually was a fairly large car. I'm just imagining the power delivery of a two-stroke just not working that well with the way they built things in those days, because, as you mentioned earlier, they're revvers, not luggers, and early internal combustion engines were sort of locomotive-like. Everything was big, stroke was big, bore was big. They were puff up, puff up, puff up, puff up, puff up, puff up. They were not little buzzy things.
Yeah, let's see. So the Model T was a 2.9 liter, so basically a 3 liter four-cylinder. And because I had been inside of one of those, it's only a 3-main bearing with splash lubrication, and those things were very chuggy. You do not want to rev a Model T or it would no longer move.
Well, and those 3 bearings you've got, those are Babbitt. You don't have modern shell bearings, and Babbitt bearings do not like high speeds.
High speeds, high temperature, anything. I've actually, I saw a friend of mine that had a Babbitt engine that got a bit a bit wee too warm and revved a bit much, and it just straight up melted the Babbitt out of the crank caps, just floated out, and it made for a bad day.
Oh yeah, well, a friend of mine bought a '42 Pontiac. This is years ago, and I told my grandfather about it, and Grandpa, all he could say was, "God damn, Pontiacs have fucking Babbitt bearings," which they still did in '42, and that was all Grandpa had to say about that.
Well, I think, well, I don't know about Babbitt, but I know GM didn't go pressurized lubrication the bottom end until, what, 54?
Oh,
Stove bolt?
Well, the stove bolt, yeah, but I mean, like the Cadillac V8s, the higher end engines had full pressure lube. It was, but that Chevy engine, which really was 1920s technology, they had these little jets at the bottom. That was another thing Grandpa told me about. Most garages used to have like a piece of steel with holes drilled out, and that is what you use to line up the oil jets in the Chevy crankcase to make sure it hit the cups at the bottom of the crankshaft, or the conrods rather.
Oh my God, that's just wild. But so let's go to let me just throw some names out and we'll talk a little more about it. Let's go to one of the cold European countries and let's talk Saab for a minute, and their two-stroke, and they actually did not start out using their own engine on the very first of the Saab cars.
Oh, really? That's fascinating. I thought they built their own two-stroke three-cylinder. Tell me more.
The three-cylinder was a Saab engine, but the very first Saab, the Saab 9.2, which looks like a little beetle about to fart itself, which I adore, that actually used a Sachs two-cylinder two-stroke engine, and that was more, I could be wrong, but I don't really think they produced too many of those. Those were mostly prototype cars, very, very early first-year production.
I believe you're right.
Two-cylinders. And then that's when they basically modeled their engine after the DKW three-cylinder. And if you look at a Saab 9.3 two-stroke three-cylinder compared to a DKW three-cylinder two-stroke, and you're like, yeah, that's yep, that's pretty similar. And granted they did their own little nuances here and there with the Saab stuff, but yeah, the first ones were two-cylinders and they were actually transverse. And then I think it was 4950. Wow, I'm totally blanking on so much of this stuff, but it was the very, very early 50s is when they came out with their three-cylinder, and then they turned it forward back with the transmission up front, which is what they ran through when they went to the V4s. And I mean, they still use that basic front-wheel drive technology all the way up until they were acquired by General Motors, I think. Well, except for the 9000, but that's a totally different world. We won't talk about that.
Well, it's working just fine. No reason to go changing it.
Well, yeah, they make the Germans look like they're crazy. Wait, we won't get into that.
I am of German extraction, and I am crazy. So.
Yeah, Swedish engineers though, they take it to a whole different level. And Greg, don't get me wrong, I love Swedish cars. There's a couple of Saabs that I would adore to get my hands on.
Well, especially one of those Monte Carlos where they've got some performance potential.
Oh, there's actually one of those in Albuquerque. It's I think it's a bullnose 850 Monte Carlo that's got the 3 one-barrel carburetors, the rev counter. And it's really entertaining. The guy who owns it put a different exhaust on it, and you hear him coming to a car show, and you swear to God you're gonna get molested by a bunch of bees.
Oh yeah, they're buzzy, poppy. They're just all kinds of character there.
Oh yeah, they are fantastic. But there is one very big downside, which actually I do know for a fact caused issues for the Americans for owning two strokes in various which ways or another. Is you cannot engine brake with a two-stroke because it will blow up the engine.
But most Saabs had freewheeling, didn't they?
They did on final gear. So on top gear, they did have freewheeling, and actually so did, as far as I know, I think there might be a way to hack into it, but the fourth gear, so the gear would be driving in at any sort of speed, had the freewheeling, as did the Trabant. I think the Wartburg also did as well, and they made it so you let off the gas pedal and you would coast, so you wouldn't lock up your engine.
Yeah, it was supposed.
That though is
it was
start rolling down the hill.
Yeah, it was for economy. It's there was a reason why they did it, but it could also kill you.
Yeah, it could kill you, but if you're used to driving a normal car with 4-stroke technology, and you're used to, oh, I'm going down a hill, you let off the gas and you just kind of coast. If you do that in a 2-stroke, it is slightly different if you have oil injection, because it's still injecting if the motor is running. But, you know, prior to oil injection, when you just pre-mixed, which, you know, everything up till, I think 61 DKW did oil injection, which was a total disaster. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then a lot of the later stuff, you know, in the late 60s, early 70s had oil injection. But if it was pre-mix, if you let your foot off the gas pedal going down a hill, you no longer got fuel into your engine, which means you no longer got oil into your engine, and it would spin and you'd lock up the engine, which I've known a couple of people who've done that.
Good to know if I ever end up with a 2-stroke car.
So, yeah, if you're ever driving and you're going down a hill and it doesn't freewheel, just kind of keep pushing the gas and the brakes at the same time. But so, kind of a funny one at that. DKW on like the one that you saw in the earlier cars, those were, you know, as usual, the early ones, they were all pre-mixed stuff. So you would mix your oil and your gasoline in the tank, and you kind of do the little car shaky wiggle thing. But they decided, I think it was around the F11, F12 era, which is, I had a 1963, it was called an F12 Junior, which was very similar to like a Ford Anglia almost, but it didn't have the back window. It was a normal conventional window. I really loved the Junior. But they decided that they wanted to have oil injection, but the oil injection was ran off of a V-belt off of the crankshaft. And as we all know, what's the problem with having something driven by a V-belt?
Belts break and belts slip.
Belts break. Belts break when you depend on that for your primary form of lubrication. And, yeah, your engine locks up. So, my grandfather, like I said in the previous episode, he actually used to work on DKWs in the local market. And he told me that he replaced more crankshafts in that era of the oil injection DKWs. And my car, which was a local car, he when he was still alive before he passed away from Alzheimer's, we were talking about it, and he was like, remove the voltage regulator for me. And I was like, okay, why? He's like, just do it, I'm curious. So I pulled out the voltage regulator, which sat on the inner wheel well, and he was like, there's my initials. He would scribe his initials into the paint under the voltage regulator, because people would be like, oh no, you never replaced my crankshaft. And he's like, my initials are right there, I already did it, you're just an idiot.
That's actually a really cool story.
Yeah, it was, my grandfather was an interesting guy, and I didn't bond a huge amount with him most of my life, but that was one of the moments that was kind of cool to have experienced. And, you know, seeing him light up and talk about working on DKWs all those years ago was really neat. And do you know what DKW stands for?
Oh, I know. It's Deutsche something Werk, but I don't know. You'll have to fill me in on that one.
Not even close. It's Das kleine Wunder. It's the little wonder.
Oh, well, look at that. See, I was so incredibly disappointingly wrong. I shall have to sentence myself to driving a Nissan Versa.
No, don't do that. No one deserves to do that.
Oh no, I'll get one with an automatic, and I can
automatic, quote unquote.
I can get one with an automatic transmission, and I'll have to listen to Delilah on like the adult contemporary channel.
I don't know if I can talk to you anymore.
Well, yeah, but I deserve it for getting just so incredibly wrong on what, you know, DKW stood for. So
if we want a little bit more of a history lesson, DKW was one of 4 automotive manufacturers in the 4 round rings that everyone so very, very much knows of the auto manufacturer that we all know as Audi.
Hork and Auto Union. Yes.
Much back in the day, it was the Auto Union, which was Wunder, Rausch, DKW, and Audi. And Audi only built race cars until, I think, 65 was the first actual official Audi car that we got, which was just kind of that's when Volkswagen and Audi started doing their thing together. But yeah, it's interesting history.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Does Audi not mean to listen?
It might. I don't actually know.
I believe that it does, but regardless. And some of those old Auto Unions, my God, with the 16 cylinders, and they were just monstrous.
Some of those old, you know, like barely pre-war, some of the post-war, Auto Union race cars. Good Lord have mercy. Those things were mental.
Well, they had the entire might of the Third Reich behind them, and the Fuhrer wanted to win.
And if you want to win, you win. So, I know I kind of feel like I'm taking over a lot of the discussion on the podcast, but Two Strokes and obscure European cars are a huge love and passion of mine. So
that's totally okay, because I know on some future episode we're going to get into MGs and Jags, and I'll probably do the exact same thing. I specifically wanted you to do this so I would learn more about these cars that fascinate the hell out of me. I mean, I just think they're so quirky and so... God, I hate to use that word, sorry. It's
especially in our world, quirky gets thrown around so much. I'd
like to expand on quote unquote quirky. Just because something is uncommon or unfamiliar does not make it quirky.
To me, people think what I love is quirky, and to me, it's just it's what I love and it's what I know. It's not that quirky, To me, something, I don't even know how I can describe what I can find quirky.
Buying a Nissan Versa on purpose, that would be quirky, because why would anyone do it?
Psychological issues, but we won't go there. I mean, I get it. There's people out there that want a car as a car. They only use a car to get from point A to point B. They don't care that they mash on the gas. It sits at 6,000 RPM. It eventually gets up to highway speed, and it drops down a little bit, and then eventually it doesn't do anything because the CVT decides not to work anymore. And they don't care. They just go buy another car.
Look, as long as the battery holds out so they can listen to Delilah, they're fine.
Oh, God. Why do you keep saying that? I have a traumatic incident from Delilah driving through the middle of California at 2 o'clock in the morning in my truck, and the only radio station I could get for like 4 hours was Delilah.
Now,
and ever since that moment, I have a very hard time hearing that.
See, and I'm from the middle of California, so this all makes perfect sense.
Oh, it does. Anyways, so next up, we will talk about my all-time favorite dream car, which has gotten a very fascinating amount of mixed reactions from people over the years. I mean, I've sat down at tables before, and people are like, "Oh my God, what's your dream car?" My dream car is a LaFerrari or a Bugatti, and I always sit there and kind of smirk, and they look at me and they're like, "What's so funny?" I'm like, "My dream car is a Trabant."
Well, and I think a Trabant is an excellent dream car. The only reason you would buy a LaFerrari or anything of that ilk is because you can no longer maintain an erection.
And that's what Trabants give me. Anyways, so
same.
We will go now to the eastern side of the European world, as you would say, and across the Iron Curtain. And now we're going into
chunk.
We're gonna put up that wall again. So now we're going to not only a European country post-war. So you got a lot of the Swedish and German. I mean, I know there was some French two-strokes too of its time frame, but those were a lot more the petite voitures, the smaller cars. So now we're gonna go to our favorite word is communism, where everyone is equal and some people are more equal than others. So now we need to produce a car that is inexpensive, easy, cheap, good fuel mileage, and has absolutely no character compared to any other vehicle, which is why I absolutely love them. And the Trabant takes the cake, because why make fiberglass when we can make Duroplast?
Well, the thing that surprises me about Duroplast is that they called it Duraplast, because that sounds like a very 1930s American marketing name. You would think they'd have just called it, Compound A395 or something.
Oh, yeah, with how they're, the state departments of all their different regulatory divisions, you figure that it would be some very off-putting name of material. That actually sounds like an early 1960s American thing.
Yeah, very much so.
Look at the new 1961 Ford Duroplast model. But yeah, anyways.
Duroplast, ribbed for her pleasure.
Yeah, pretty much. So, in post-war Soviet era, we want to make fiberglass, but we really don't either have the resources or the ability. So we take what we have and we recycle material such as wool, cotton, bit of paper, kind of such like that.
Any fiber.
Oh, any fiber. In that region, we do have plants that produce wool and cotton and such for very base, simple clothing materials. And we take that and we mix it together in a plastic-like resin, and then we squish it together and heat it up and create a thermoset composite plastic-y material called Duroplast. And when it comes out, it is a very, very off-putting shade of brown. Oh my god, it is disturbing how it looks, just raw Duroplast. And then we paint it like one of 4 to 5 different colors, and you get a lovely robin's egg blue. You get prosthetic limb, which is a personal favorite.
Same.
Baby puke, shit greenish. It's very just color. Like that one too. And I forget what other colors they did.
A friend of mine has got a Moskvich, and yes, I know it's a 4-cycle engine, but it looks like it was painted by a Russian potato woman with a mop. The brushstrokes, it's just awful. But he's also got a Lada, and the fit and finish on that is rather good.
They had their ups and downs. It's the depending on probably what day it was, what region it was, what level of vodka capacity we were at that day. What I'll do in the link of this video, which everyone has to see, I'm not going to demand, but I'm going to say, for your entertainment value, please watch the video that I will post on YouTube of the Trabant manufacturing line and how they adjust the body panels with pieces of wood and your foot, because it is fantastic to watch.
Cary's not going to make you watch it, but the party looks poorly upon nonconformists. You have been warned.
Watch the video. And Ladas, I mean, we can get into talking about some of the other Soviet stuff. I mean, my God, those were like military tank bunkers, how they built the Ladas. I would adore to own a Lada at some point. A Trabant, a Lada, a Moskvich, and I don't know. I really just want a whole fleet of former Soviet Union cars. That would just make my life so happy.
So I live, most of my life adjacent to Washington D.C., and every year at the International Spy Museum.
Yes, the spy.
They have a gathering of Eastern Bloc cars. Last time I was there, there was Dacias, there was Lada, there was multiple Trabants, and there was a couple other cars whose name escapes me, and even if I knew it, it would probably be unpronounceable. And it was just a delight to see. But when all these little two-strokers start firing up at the end of the day, there's this smoke cloud enveloping the entire area, and I'm like, we're only a half a mile from the EPA. What are they going to say about this?
I actually, because I've been part, not fully part of the Trabant Club, but I've been kind of,
Trabant adjacent,
off to the side for many, many years of the local Trabant Club, and also some of the European Trabant groups as well, and a bunch of the Soviet car folks of America that go to that. My favorite thing is they set up a bunch of cardboard boxes and paint it to make it look like a wall, and people drive their Trabants through the cardboard boxes to look like they're driving through the old Berlin Wall. That's a personal favorite event that I would like to go to at some point if they don't ban it. But yeah, if you look at, like East Germany photos, say 70s and 80s, there was always just this plume of smoke, and you just see lines of Trabants and Wartburgs just kind of cruising around. And
well, we should point out that the Trabi was in production for a long time, and eventually it lost its two-stroke and earned a Volkswagen four-stroke engine, but
for 1 year only.
Oh, I thought it was long. I thought it was longer than that. Just 1 year.
So the Sachsenflink Automobilswerken, if I remember right, the top of my head, the original Trabant came out in 1955, and that was the P60, P50, I forget, because I only really know the 601s. The earlier stuff than that's kind of a bit oddball stuff, but the P601s is the Trabant that everyone knows and loves, and that came out in 64, and they ran that car basically unchanged until 1990, And we have to remember by then, the East had already fallen, where they were starting to, kind of join back together. And they decided that they wanted to make an export car to be able to keep the industry of that plant up and continue selling Trabant. So in 1991, for 1 year only, they put a 1.1 liter Volkswagen Lupo engine in a Trabant, and they changed the whole front end. They tried to modernize it. The interior changed. It had a 4-speed floor shifter instead of the goofy umbrella stick shifter on the column like all the earlier two-strokers had. And they tried to make it a very civilized, modern car. 1991 Trabant, compared to what you could buy in 1991 from any other country in the world, did not really fare so well. So they didn't make it past 91, and they just stopped producing them.
A tragic day indeed. So, we've talked all about Europe, but there was a contingent of Japanese two-stroke, I'm sure others, but the Mazda Shantae comes immediately to mind, and it was rather a sophisticated-looking little thing, and it was built to K-car specs, and to me, K-car is limited to 600 cc's?
Not back then. So I'll break in for you on this one for a second. For anyone who doesn't know, K-car, and I'm sure you have a lot of references to people talk about older Japanese car, and that's K-E-I.
Yeah, not an Iacocca K-car.
No, not K-car, which that will be an entire episode on itself, because I adore K-cars, and those are the Malays wonders. But for Japanese K-cars, again, a country that was war-torn, very poor, wanting to get a car, but even back then, getting a driver's license was an expensive, difficult thing. So they created a classification of a car that earlier back in the day, it was 360 cc was the requirement for K.
But I'm looking at pictures of this little Shantae, and it's very sophisticated, and it's also under that threshold. But it's amazing how different it is from a Trabant. Like the fit and finish is all rather nice, and it's an optimistic little car rather than a, well, now we get you to where you need to go, maybe car.
Well, it's the Japanese compared to, like some of the European, the mindset on the manufacturing was so very different.
Oh,
very
absolutely.
Interesting to see.
So you said you got to drive a Trabi, and what was the experience like? Like shifting and like power delivery and just the whole or lack of power delivery.
So, I have heard from, I've watched Trabant videos for years, and everyone's always said the brakes are crap, the steering feels like it's set in concrete, but yet very vague. The clutch it exists. The shifter is entirely backwards than what you would think it should be, and it's very clunky. The engine is buzzy. You got to rev it out to really get it going. There's very little power from what it has. And that's exactly what I experienced. There was actually a guy that I still know. He lives in Germany now, but his family lives here. When he was 16, his first car he ever bought was a Trabant. It was a 66 P601. And actually, I got a hold of him, and he drove it. And when he first drove it, he would just kind of barely get into it and shift. And I was like, oh, no, you gotta get into it. You gotta rev it out. You can't just So he let me drive it. And we drove around his neighborhood for about a half an hour. And it was the most entertaining / relatively disturbing experience because of just kind of genuinely how bad the car was. I mean, the fit and finish and the smell of it was odd. Just how it drove was very... I couldn't even call it industrial because that's giving it too much credit. It was just very... You can tell it was a cheap car made in a former Soviet country that was made to move people around in some way, fashion, or another.
It sounds more like an existential crisis than a car.
It's better than riding a motorcycle, so there is that.
And I'm sure we could probably go down a tangent on motorcycles, like Yavas and whatever else. But that's, again, tangents. We have two ADHD folks hosting the show. Tangents must be controlled, and it is not easy.
As much as we can, which there will always be that tangent we go off of on little tracks when we're talking. But, again, like I said before, the Trabant, now, if you were lucky enough, or in that class, to be able to get a Wartburg in the eastern side of Germany, that was a 3-cylinder, liquid-cooled, actually fairly well put-together car. And I got to drive a Wartburg once, and quite a bit more refined. It's got way more power. It shifts quite a bit better. The steering is quite a bit better. It really overall drives significantly better than a Trabant. But nonetheless, I don't care what it is. I will own a Trabant, and it is my all-time favorite car.
So I've actually pulled up a picture, an engineering X-ray drawing of a Wartburg, and the chassis is really interesting. It's this sort of horseshoe-shaped affair, and it's got the spring pan, the rear spring pans mounted to it, and then the front drivetrain mounts, to the front. But it's not two frame rails. It's its own little thing. It's quite fast. I'm frustrated that we're doing essentially radio, a podcast versus video, because I'd really like to share this drawing. It's quite something, and it shows how you can get luggage in the back, and just the sheer excellence and efficiency of the Wartburg. Are we getting close to wind down?
Let me check. We have recorded quite a lot, and I think we should probably get towards wrapping it up, because we're a bit over even our average time, because as usual you get me on a very fascinating subject and I just start blabbing about it.
We should come up with a new subject, and I picked the last one, so you can pick the subject for the next show, and I'll let you announce it when we do our wind down.
Oh yeah. So we'll just we'll end off on saying, as entertaining as the two-stroke world and the two-stroke cars are, world understanding of pollution, reliability, more things like automatics and more manufacturing and people, wanting, as you say, quote unquote, real cars, definitely did kill the two strokes. There was still a couple of very niche things around about, two strokes lived on for many, many, many years in boats, for instance, jet skis, motorbikes, and that's a totally different thing. But as far as the cars that we drive, four strokes won because you get better power delivery, better fuel economy, far less pollution because you're not directly on purpose burning oil. But anyways, I have very much enjoyed talking about one of my favorite subjects of very smoky, inefficient, small European cars. And I think next week we should talk about... I'm going to suggest it and then throw the tennis ball back in your court a little bit. I want to talk about something near and dear to both of us. Some subject pertain to the Malaise era, which Malaise of in itself is very big. So I want to shrink it down a little bit and talk about something specific of and in the Malaise era.
Well, Malaise was all about downsizing in the name of efficiency. Hell, General Motors spent $1 billion in 1970s money to make their full-sized B-body less than full-sized, and that's a subject unto its own, under its own right, and we shall talk about that at some point as well. So
I'm going to go ahead and say, stay tuned next time, and we're going to talk about a surprise of some sort of Malaise-era automobiles, which will be, again, a very great tangent that we're going to bounce back and forth on.
Oh, fantastic. So next week, everyone, you've got to tune in for the Malaise surprise, and no, that is not one of my casserole recipes. And also, don't forget, you should watch Cary's Garage on YouTube. I'm a terrible co-host. I have not been watching it like I should, but that's my loss. You don't have to follow my mistake. Watch Cary's Garage on YouTube.
That would be very much appreciated. And I've got quite a few videos up. I'm almost, a year and a half in or so, and I haven't been filming as much as I want to, but I am starting to film quite a bit more, so there will be a lot more content, so definitely check it out. And as a lot of people who already know Bryan, if you haven't already checked out the Malaise Motors Facebook, great group, some fantastic people, great discussions, fantastic pictures. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up on my end and say thank you so much for joining us on Motors and Martinis. And now that we've motored, pour yourself a martini and enjoy your evening.